Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving straight into something I know a lot of us have been thinking about: the multi-layered crisis of smartphones, social media, and teenage mental health. There's so much noise out there on this topic, but we're going to cut right through it. We'll use a structured layer-by-layer analysis of the latest research to understand exactly how the digital world is reshaping the adolescent mind. All right, let's get into it.
To really wrap our heads around this, we're going to look at 5 key pieces: the collapse of physical socializing, social media as what researchers call attention alcohol, prevalence inflation and reverse CBT, how we're exporting the American psyche, and finally, the actual cognitive costs and potential solutions. Let's start with part 1, the collapse of physical socializing, or basically, losing the real world.
So let's ground this in some pretty stark numbers right off the bat. Researchers have found that between 2003 and 2022, face-to-face socializing among teenagers dropped by more than 45%. I mean, to put that into perspective, that equates to a loss of over 3 hours of actual in-person hangout time every single week. Think about that for a second. That is 3 hours of physical connection simply gone from the modern adolescence experience.
And the trade-off here is absolutely massive. This isn't just about kids picking up a new hobby. It's a total displacement. The routines necessary for growing up, learning to read body language, navigating physical social dynamics, building deep interpersonal trust. They've been swapped out for time spent alone. They are now staring into what researchers literally call a virtual void. Real-world socializing has basically collapsed, and this virtual void has just taken its place.
And when we look at the demographic data objectively, it's really telling. Smartphones have essentially colonized the youth's social experience across the board. But the groups with the biggest spikes in phone usage, and liberal teenage girls stand out here, are exhibiting the absolute most dramatic declines in time spent with friends. The correlation is crystal clear, right? The more phone usage goes up, the more that physical friend time takes a nosedive.
Which brings us to part 2, social media as attention alcohol, the algorithmic layer.
There's this incredibly useful metaphor in the research. Social media functions almost exactly like attention alcohol. Think about it. It's a digital substance that might be totally fine, maybe even a little fun, in small, moderated doses. But in large quantities, it becomes unwholesome, super potent, and potentially addictive. It just pulls teenagers in and fundamentally alters how they perceive themselves and the world around them.
To see just how potent this attention alcohol can be, we only need to look at Instagram's own internal data. They found, shockingly, that 32% of teenage girls who already felt bad about their bodies reported that the app actually made them feel worse. It is not a neutral space, guys. For nearly a third of these vulnerable users, the platform actively amplified their negative self-image.
So why does this happen? Well, it's because these platforms have built what's perfectly described as a suffocating prestige economy. It's a whole new normal where the way you look and visually present yourself is constantly rewarded with digital kudos. Instead of figuring out who they are through real-world actions, teens are pushed into this obsessive loop about their digital status, constantly measuring themselves against impossible, filtered standards.
And the kicker here is that in this environment, quantified rewards like likes, shares, and follower counts essentially become the new grades. Just like a student might stress over a math test, they're now stressing over the performance of their latest post. It takes what should be precious, relaxing leisure time and twists it into this state of constant anxiety-inducing virtual competition. They are basically never off the clock.
Moving on to part 3, prevalence inflation and reverse CBT, the cultural layer.
We're currently seeing the rise of a phenomenon called prevalence inflation. Because mental health is talked about so frequently, and honestly so casually online, teenagers are just bombarded with this messaging that mental health problems are everywhere. Because of this, they can actually start to interpret entirely normal levels of teenage stress, awkwardness, or just having a bad day as signs of a severe clinical disorder.
You can see how this builds into a really devastating self-fulfilling spiral. First, a teenager becomes hypervigilant about totally normal stress, constantly checking themselves for symptoms they learned about on a TikTok or Instagram reel. Second, believing they're clinically unwell, they start to socially withdraw. And third, that isolation actually triggers the onset of real clinical anxiety and depression. It's wild. The fear of the symptom actually ends up creating the disease.
And making matters worse is the kind of advice that actually goes viral. Traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is designed to help patients avoid catastrophic thinking. But modern internet culture, it promotes this dangerous reverse CBT ideology. Viral content absolutely thrives on outrage, indignation, and catastrophizing.
So instead of building resilience, it's teaching young people to take their normal, everyday thoughts and interpret them in the most extreme, distressing ways possible.
All right, part 4. Exporting the American psyche, the global phenomenon.
Now this is fascinating. The data shows this isn't just some global biological shift that's happening evenly everywhere. Instead, we're seeing what researchers call an Anglosphere despair. The sharpest spikes in teenage mental distress are heavily concentrated in English-speaking countries, specifically the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia.
So what does that actually suggest? Well, through the sheer dominance of English-language media and social platforms, the U.S. is essentially exporting a highly neurotic and individualistic approach to mental health. Vulnerable kids in other English-speaking nations are watching American influencers in media, and they're internalizing and acting out those exact same pathologies right on their own screens. We are literally watching the globalization of the American psyche.
Finally, let's look at part 5. Cognitive costs and solutions, the impact beyond mood.
The research on this is so clear. A phone doesn't even need to be buzzing to cause a problem. Even if a student isn't actively scrolling, just having a smartphone in their field of vision acts as an active drain on their cognitive focus. A chunk of their brain power is constantly working just to resist the urge to check the screen, which obviously leaves way less mental energy for the actual lesson at hand.
And the academic toll of that split attention is undeniable. Students who spend more than 5 hours a day on digital devices score significantly lower in core subjects, like math. So this cognitive cost is showing up directly in their academic performance. That attention alcohol we talked about earlier, it is actively hollowing out their ability to sit down and do deep, focused work.
Ultimately, what you should really take away from this is that this profound device dependence isn't just about slipping grades. It is directly eroding overall life satisfaction. The data proves that the more dependent a teenager is on their digital devices, the lower their reported happiness and satisfaction with life becomes. It's a systemic drain on their entire well-being.
Given everything we've unpacked in this explainer, from the massive drop in physical socializing and the suffocating prestige economies, to prevalence inflation and real cognitive decline, a lot of researchers are now advocating for some pretty extreme measures. Interventions that would have sounded radical just 5 years ago are now seriously on the table, which leaves us with a huge question to consider. Is a total school ban on smartphones the only necessary cure left to finally